Cyrus Kane nailed the foreclosure notice to Clara Whitfield's front door at 2:30 on a Tuesday, while her children were still in school. He did not knock. He did not wait. He just hammered the nail, turned his horse around, and rode back toward town without once looking back at the house. Clara heard the knock of iron against wood from the kitchen. She wiped her hands on her apron, walked to the front door, opened it, read the notice once. Then she pulled it off the nail with both hands, walked to the stove, and fed it to the fire. She watched every word burn. Then she went back to making supper. If this story reaches you on a cold evening, I would be glad to know where you are watching from. Sometimes the simplest hello reminds us that warmth still travels across great distances. Please subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what city or town you are watching from tonight. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let us begin. The notice said March 15th. Clara had read it before she burned it. 60 days. The debt Robert left behind when the Garrison mine took him 3 years ago. The loan she had been cutting down month by month with every traveler who stopped for a meal. Every cord of firewood she hauled to town on the Garfield mare. Every egg her 3 remaining hens managed to produce before the cold shut them down for winter. 60 days, and the Whitfield station would belong to Cyrus Kane. She knew what Kane wanted. Not the debt, not the money. The land sat on the only clean water source between Copper Ridge and the Eastern Pass, and Kane had been trying to buy it since before Robert was cold in the ground. First he sent letters, then he sent his clerk. Then he stopped pretending it was a business proposition and started calling it what it was. A debt that a widow with 3 children had no realistic way of clearing before spring. She had not cried when they brought Robert home from the mine. She did not cry now. She made cornbread and kept her back straight, and when her daughter Lucy came through the door at 4 o'clock and looked at her mother's face the way 16-year-olds looked when they were trying to read weather, Clara said, "Set the table." And that was the end of it. "How bad?" Lucy asked anyway. 60 days. Lucy set down her coat without hanging it, stood very still the way her father used to stand still when the numbers were not working. March 15th. Yes. We could sell the mare. Then we have no horse come spring, and no way to haul anything, and no way to get Daniel to the doctor when he gets that cough again. We could take in more travelers. Nobody travels in January, Lucy. Then what do we... I will figure it out. Clara pulled the cornbread from the oven. I always do. Lucy picked up her coat and hung it on the hook. Said nothing else. That was the thing about Lucy. She had learned when her mother's voice closed a door that pushing on it only made things worse. She had learned it the hard way. The same winter Robert died, when Clara had gone 4 days without sleeping, and Lucy had kept asking questions until her mother sat down at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning and said, very quietly, "I need you to stop asking me things I do not have answers to." Lucy had not pushed since. Rose came in 20 minutes later with her mittens soaked through and her dark hair full of snow, stopping in the doorway to pull off her boots with the careful precision of a child who had been told too many times about muddy floors. 11 years old, Robert's gentleness in a small frame. She looked at her mother's face. She looked at Lucy's face. She did not ask anything. She crossed the kitchen, pressed herself against Clara's side for exactly 4 seconds, and then went to wash her hands. That was Rose. She saw everything and said almost nothing, and somehow always managed to say the one right thing with her body instead of her mouth. Daniel arrived last, boots slamming on the porch, the door crashing open with a particular violence of an 8-year-old who had been outside all day and had no interest in transitioning quietly back to being indoors. "There's a blizzard coming," he announced. "Billy Marsh said his pa said it's going to be the worst one since '78. Billy Marsh's father said the same thing about last January, Clara said, and we got 4 inches. Yeah, but this time Billy's pa seemed real sure. Wash your hands. Mama, are the cows going to freeze? Because if the cows freeze, we're not going to have... Daniel. Lucy pointed at the wash basin. You ain't Mama. Hands, Clara said, without turning from the stove. Now. He went. Still talking, but he went. By the time supper was on the table, the wind had picked up enough to rattle the shutters. And by the time Clara cleared the dishes, it was coming in hard from the north, driving snow sideways across the yard in sheets that erased the fence line and the road and everything beyond 20 feet of the house. Daniel pressed his face against the kitchen window and watched it like it was entertainment specifically arranged for him. Them cows are definitely freezing, he said. They're in the barn with fresh straw, and they've survived Wyoming winters longer than you've been alive. Bess looked cold this morning. Bess always looks cold. It's her natural expression. Rose laughed, a small sound, quickly covered. Even Lucy's mouth moved. Clara sent the children to bed at 8. Rose went, without argument. Daniel negotiated for 10 more minutes, lost, and went with the particular slowness of a boy maximizing the distance between a request and its compliance. Lucy stayed at the table with her mending, her needle moving steadily through the torn knee of Daniel's second-best trousers, and did not look up when Clara checked the bolt on the front door. You going to sleep? Lucy asked. In a while. Mama. The needle stopped. We will figure it out. March is still a long way off. Clara looked at the back of her daughter's head, the dark hair so much like Robert's, the set of the shoulders that was entirely her own. 16 years old and already carrying the specific weight of being the oldest child in a house where something was always nearly breaking. I know we will, Clara said. Get some sleep when you're done with that. She went to her room, sat on the edge of the bed with her boots still on, and let herself have exactly 60 seconds of just sitting there. She had started doing this after Robert died, giving herself 1 minute, counted out, to feel whatever needed to be felt. Not more than a minute, just enough to acknowledge it, and then put it back where it needed to go. 60 days, the wood supply going thin. Daniel's boots with the sole separating at the left toe. The way she'd stuffed a folded piece of leather inside to make them last another month. The medicine she hadn't bought in October, because the cough syrup cost 30 cents. And 30 cents was the difference between the flour lasting through December or not. 60 seconds. Then she put on her practical face, the one she wore the way other women wore good jewelry. The one that said, I have handled worse than this, and I will handle this too. And she stood up. That was when she heard it. Not wind, not the house settling. 3 knocks on the front door, slow and deliberate. The knock of someone who was not sure they had the right to knock at all. Clara stood still for 3 full seconds. Then she went to the kitchen, took the shotgun from the hook behind the door, and walked to the front of the house. The man on her porch was covered in snow from hat to boot, the way a man got covered when he had been in the open for a long time before he found somewhere to stop. His coat was heavy canvas, dark with moisture, his hat pulled low. His hands at his sides, palms out, fingers spread. The posture of someone who had faced guns before and knew exactly what helped. Ma'am? His voice was rough from cold. I'm not asking for much. Just out of the wind long enough to feel my feet again. I can sleep in the barn if you've got one. I won't be any trouble. Clara looked at him, then past him at the yard full of driving snow, the road completely gone. What's her name? A pause. Buttercup. Clara had learned over 37 years that a man who named his horse Buttercup was one of 2 things: dangerously sentimental, or lying about something bigger. She had not decided which was worse. "Put her in the barn," she said. "Second stall, dry hay. Come to the back door when you're done." She lowered the barrel. "I will leave the lamp on." She watched him turn back into the blizzard. She closed the door, stood in the hallway holding the shotgun and listening to the storm. Then she went to the kitchen and put the bean soup back on the stove. "His name was Jack," he said. "Just Jack." No last name offered, and she did not ask, because she had lived long enough to know that men traveling the Wyoming territories in January with only a first name were either running from something or resting from something, and in either case, the family name was beside the point. He sat where she pointed, at the far end of the kitchen table, hat in his lap. When she set the tin cup in front of him, she saw his hands for the first time, and something in the back of her mind went quiet and watchful. The hands were wrong. Not wrong in any way she could have put into a sentence, just wrong the way a working man's hands had a particular story. The scarring, the thickening, the way skin sat over knuckles after years of rope and iron and frozen wood. This man's hands were clean in the creases. The kind of clean that did not come from washing. The kind that came from not having done the work. She set the soup in front of him and said nothing about the hands. "This is more than I expected," he said. "I make too much soup. Always have." She sat across from him with her coffee and looked at him in the lamplight. Late 50s, gray at the temples and in 3 days of beard. Squint lines around the eyes, the kind earned outdoors over decades. But there was something behind the eyes she could not immediately place. The quality of a man who had spent a long time being the most important person in every room he entered, and had recently decided, for reasons of his own, to stop. "You run this place alone?" he asked. "3 children and me." "Husband?" "Gone." The word she used with strangers. Not dead, just gone. The way a fire went when it had used up everything it had. He nodded, did not push. Ate. The floorboard in the hallway creaked. Daniel appeared in the doorway in his nightshirt, dark eyes moving between his mother and the stranger with the expression of a boy who had been told to go to bed enough times that he had developed genuine expertise in ignoring it. "Who's that?" "A traveler. Bed." "Is he staying?" "Barn." "In the blizzard?" He looked at Jack with something that was not quite accusation and not quite sympathy. "Our barn's got a hole in the north corner. Wind comes straight through. You'll want to put your bedroll on the south side, second stall." Jack looked at the boy. Something moved across his face, quick and controlled, gone before Clara could fully read it. "Much obliged," he said, and he said it the way people said things when they actually meant them. "Also Bess, she's the brown one. She kicks in her sleep." "How old?" 8. Girls are 11 and 16. He turned his cup slowly between his palms. "You manage all of this? The station, the children, the winter?" "I manage what needs managing." She looked at him steadily. "What kind of work do you do, when you're not just traveling east?" A pause, half a second too long. "Whatever needs doing." "Fences? Timber? I've got a wood supply running short before February." "Yes, ma'am, I can do that." "I don't have money to pay." "Meals and dry shelter is wages enough in this weather." Clara looked at him across the table. He looked back. No hostility on either side, just 2 people who had both lived long enough to know when an answer was an answer and when it was a redirection, and to decide whether to press. She did not press. "Snow like this runs 3 days sometimes," she said. "Stay until it breaks. After that, We talk about the wood." She stood, moved to the basin. "There are 2 blankets on the hook inside the barn door. Soup can warm again in the morning." "You're generous." "I'm practical." She turned, dried her hands. "I need that wood split before February. You need to not freeze to death in my yard. Neither of us is doing the other a favor. We're just solving the same problem from different ends." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes, ma'am. I suppose we are." She showed him out the back with the lamp and the blankets. Watched the barn light appear in the small window across the dark yard, a square of yellow in all that white and black. Then she bolted the door. Lucy was still up when Clara checked the hallway. Sitting on the edge of her bed, mending set aside. "Who is he?" "A traveler." "Does he seem—" "He seems cold," Clara said, "and hungry, and tired in a way that's got nothing to do with riding in the snow." She reached in and turned down the lamp. "Sleep." She went to her own room, sat down, did not take her boots off for a long moment. She thought about the hands, the pauses, the way he had said, "much obliged" to Daniel, like it was not something he gave away freely. She thought about he had told himself he was just traveling, clearing his head, getting some distance from the lawyers and the ledgers and the house with 16 rooms he moved through alone every day, like a man haunting his own property. He had told himself a lot of things. He had not told himself he would end up on a widow's porch in a blizzard, getting instructions about a horse named Bess from a boy who gave them with complete seriousness and expected them to be taken the same way. He had not told himself he would sit at a stranger's kitchen table and feel, for the first time in years he could not accurately count, like he was somewhere that mattered. The barn was cold. The wind hit the north corner and came through the gap Daniel had described, exactly where Daniel had said it would. Holt had moved his bedroll to the south side without thinking twice about it, and that small thing, taking the advice of an 8-year-old without hesitation, had sat with him in a way he could not explain. He pressed his palms flat against each other in the dark. He had not known Clara Whitfield existed until 11 days ago, when his lawyer mentioned, as a footnote to a larger conversation, that the Whitfield station water rights would come. He closed his eye. His first dozen swings were wrong. Too high, wasted effort, the kind of swings a man made when he was relying on force instead of technique. He adjusted, found the grain. By the time Clara came out the back door with a cup of coffee in each hand, the stack against the barn wall had grown by a third. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at the wood, then at him. Then she walked across the yard and held out one of the cups without a word. He took it. "Morning." "You started early." "Couldn't sleep." He set the axe head down in the snow and wrapped both hands around the cup. The coffee was weak. He could tell she was stretching the supply. But it was hot, and it was real, and it tasted better than anything that had ever come out of the kitchen in his house in Cheyenne. "How much do you need to get through February?" Clara looked at the remaining logs stacked against the fence. He watched her do the calculation in her head, quick and practiced, the way a woman did math when the numbers had always mattered. "Double what you've done, maybe more if it stays cold past the 20th. "I'll have it done by noon." She looked at him with that steady, gray-eyed look that had no particular warmth in it and no hostility either, just assessment. The look of a woman who had learned to evaluate people the same way she evaluated everything else, by what they actually did, not by what they said they would do. "Breakfast is in an hour," she said, and walked back to the house. He watched her go. Then he picked up the axe and kept working. Daniel appeared at 9 o'clock, materializing at Holt's elbow without any warning, in the way the children did when they had decided something was interesting enough to investigate in person. He stood there for a full minute just watching, his breath coming in small clouds, his boots leaving prints in the snow that Holt noticed with a sharp, quiet attention he did not show on his face. The left boot was printing wrong. The sole and the inside edge was separating. The boy was walking on the leather lining. "You're doing it wrong," Daniel said. Holt set the axe. "Am I? Papa used to split the pine ones different from the oak ones. Pine you hit off center. Oak you go straight down the middle or the axe gets stuck." "Your father taught you that?" "He taught me a lot of things before the mine." Daniel said it the way children said hard things sometimes, directly and without flinching, because they had not yet learned to dress them up. He crouched down and picked up a piece of pine, turned it over in his small hands, set it on the block with the crack facing out. "Like this." Holt looked at the piece of wood, then at the boy. He picked up the axe, adjusted his angle, and split it exactly where Daniel had indicated. It came apart clean, 2 even halves. "Huh," Holt said. Daniel nodded, satisfied. "Papa said watching how a man swings an axe tells you a lot about how he thinks." "What does my swing tell you?" Daniel considered this with genuine seriousness. "That you used to know what you were doing, and then you stopped doing it for a long time, and now you're trying to remember." He picked up both halves and stacked them neatly against the barn wall. "That's not bad. That's just what happens." Holt stood there with the axe in his hands and the cold working through his coat and said nothing for a moment. "You're a perceptive kid." "Mrs. Aldridge at school says I'm too perceptive. She says I need to learn when to keep my observations to myself." He dusted the bark off his mittens. "I'm still working on that." "Most people work on that their whole lives." "Did it work for you?" Holt looked at him. "Not particularly." Daniel seemed to find this answer acceptable. He stayed for another 20 minutes, handing up logs and pointing out grain patterns with the focused authority of a boy who had inherited one good thing from his father and was not going to let it go to waste. When Clara called him in for breakfast, he went without argument, which struck Holt as notable given what he had observed of the boy's general relationship with instructions. Breakfast was cornmeal mush with a spoonful of molasses swirled through it, served in 4 bowls at the kitchen table. Clara set a 5th bowl in front of Holt's place at the end, without commentary, the same end he had sat at the night before, which apparently had become his place without either of them deciding it. Rose sat across from him. She had not said a single word to him yet. She watched him the way small animals watch things they had not decided about. Not afraid, not friendly, just gathering information. She had her mother's eyes, that same gray, watchful quality. But where Clara's eyes were steady and direct, Rose's were soft at the edges. They missed nothing and gave very little back. "Do you have children?" she asked suddenly. The table went quiet. Lucy looked up from her bowl. Daniel stopped eating, which was a significant indicator of the moment's gravity. "Rose," Clara said, "it's a regular question, Mama." Holt set his spoon down, looked at the girl across the table. She was waiting with genuine patience, no embarrassment about the question, just honest curiosity. "No," he said, "I don't." "Why not?" "Rose." Clara's voice carried a finality that even Rose recognized as a boundary. But Rose kept her eyes on Holt for another second, not defiantly, just the way an 11-year-old kept her eyes on something when she felt the answer she had been given was a partial answer, and she was noting that fact for future reference. Then she went back to her mush. Holt picked up his spoon. Under the table, where no one could see, his hand had tightened into a fist against his knee. The answer he had not given Rose was this. He had not had children because he had not had anyone who stayed. And he had not had anyone who stayed because the money always arrived in the room before he did. And people had a way of arranging themselves around the money in ways that had nothing to do with him. He had stopped trying to explain this distinction somewhere around age 45, and had started explaining it to himself as a preference for solitude, which was the kind of lie that was comfortable enough to live inside for a while. The blizzard broke on the third day. The snow stopped around noon, the sky clearing to a hard, bright blue that hurt to look at. The temperature dropping another 15 degrees as the clouds moved off. The road reappeared, a white line cutting through white fields, and by mid-afternoon, the first wagon had come through from the direction of Copper Ridge. A supply hauler named Patterson, who knew Clara by name and sat at her table for 45 minutes eating soup and warming his hands, and leaving $2 on the table when he stood to go, which Clara took and put in the tin box on the high shelf, without any of the hesitation Holt might have expected. He was outside splitting the last of the fence-line wood when Patterson's wagon rolled past. The man looked at him without recognition and without particular interest. Just a drifter doing work for a widow, nothing worth a second look. And Holt felt the specific, complicated quality of being invisible to someone who would have stood up straighter if he had known. He had felt it before on this trip. Felt it the first day when he walked into the Copper Ridge trading post in the old coat, and the man behind the counter talked to him slowly and loudly, as if being poorly dressed correlated with difficulty hearing. Felt it in every town between Cheyenne and here, this quality of becoming a different size depending on what coat he was wearing. The thing that surprised him was that invisible was easier than he had expected. Not easier in a comfortable way. Easier the way a cold room was easier than a room full of people asking things from you. Clara came out when Patterson's wagon was gone and stood next to the fence watching him work. She did this sometimes, not watching the work exactly, more watching the space around the work, checking the yard, the road, the barn. The watchfulness of a woman who was always measuring what she had against what might happen next. "Patterson mentioned Kane was at the trading post yesterday," she said. Holt set the axe. "The banker? He came in person to check whether I'd sold the mare yet." She said it the same way she said most things, flat and factual, no invitation for sympathy. "He does that, comes by periodically to remind me he's watching the calendar." "He can do that? Just come check on your assets?" "He holds the note. He can do a lot of things." She looked at the road where Patterson's wagon had disappeared. "He sent a man out last October to appraise the water rights on the east pasture. Didn't tell me he was coming. I found a stranger walking my property line with a surveying rod." Holt was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about Kane, had been thinking about him since that first night, when he lay in the barn and worked through the shape of things. The Whitfield station loan was one of 43 similar instruments his law firm had packaged into a territory development portfolio 6 years ago. He had signed the papers without reading each individual note. A 43-page document, witnessed and sealed, and somewhere inside it was Clara Whitfield's land. "What happens if he gets it?" Holt asked. "The land. He controls the water access for 3 farms east of here, plus the road rights, plus whatever he decides to do with the station itself." She picked up a piece of split wood and turned it over in her hands, not looking at him. "He came to Robert's funeral, you know. Stood at the grave and shook my hand, and told me if I ever needed anything at all, I should come see him." She set the wood down. 2 weeks later, he sent the first collection notice. Holt picked up the axe. He drove it into the next log, harder than necessary, felt the impact run up through both arms into his shoulders. The log split and fell, and he set another one on the block and split that one too. And then another, working with a focused violence that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with a man who had come to a widow's funeral and then sent a collection notice 2 weeks later. He had never met Cyrus Kane in person. Kane operated in a different scale of finance than the territory banking Holt typically touched. But he knew the type with a precision that came from having spent 30 years in rooms with men who thought of other people's hardship as opportunity. He had been in those rooms. He had signed documents that created those opportunities without looking at whose name was on the other side. He was looking now. That evening, Lucy made the cornbread while Clara mended Rose's coat at the kitchen table, working on the torn pocket with the quick, efficient stitches of a woman who had mended the same garment so many times she no longer had to think about it. Daniel sat on the floor near the stove with a piece of charcoal and a flat board, drawing something with intense concentration, occasionally making a sound under his breath that suggested things were not going precisely as planned. Holt sat at the far end of the table and did not pretend to be doing anything except being there. It was a thing he had noticed about this house. Nobody required you to justify your presence with activity. You could just sit. He could not remember the last time he had been in a room where that was true. "Jack," Daniel said without looking up from his board, "how do you draw a horse?" "Daniel, the man is not here to—" Lucy started. "It's fine." Holt pulled the board toward him, looked at the misshapen figure Daniel had been working on. He picked up the charcoal, drew the line of a horse's back, the neck, the angle of the legs. Simple lines, nothing complicated. "Start with the back," he said. "Everything else hangs off the back." Daniel watched with his chin in his hands. "You draw good." "I used to draw maps, long time ago." He handed the board back. "Before sign papers sat in offices," he said, and then stopped, because those exact words were too close to something he had actually said, something true that had come out before he thought about it. Daniel did not notice. He was already working the charcoal into the shape of a horse, laboring over it with his tongue pressed between his teeth. Rose, who had been pretending to read a worn primer across the table, was watching Holt with those quiet, gray eyes. Clara was watching him too. He could feel it without looking up. The same watchfulness from this morning, the same quality of filing things away. She had the same look she'd had when she noticed his hands the first night. Not accusatory, not suspicious exactly, just the look of a woman whose attention was very precise and whose patience was very long. He looked up and met her eyes. She did not look away. Neither did he. It lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then Rose said, "Mama, can I have the brown thread?" And Clara handed it to her without looking, and the moment closed over itself like water over a stone. That night, Holt lay in the barn and stared at the roof boards and thought about the surveyor Kane had sent to walk Clara's property line without telling her. He thought about the collection notice 2 weeks after the funeral. He thought about Daniel's boot printing wrong in the snow, the leather lining stuffed in the toe, and the way Clara had looked at that same board across the kitchen table and had not let him see that she was tired. He had the money to end this. He could ride to Cheyenne tomorrow, have the Whitfield note retired by the end of the week, have it done without anyone knowing where the money came from. He had done exactly that kind of anonymous transaction before. Hospitals, schools, water projects. He knew how to move money without a name attached to it. But the difference between those transactions and this one had become very clear to him, lying in this barn over the past 3 nights. And it was this. Those transactions had cost him nothing except money. This one would cost him something he had not yet calculated, and the calculation scared him in a way he had not expected. Because if he cleared the note anonymously, Clara kept her land, and he kept his secret and rode east, and nothing changed. She never knew. She kept getting up before dawn and stretching the cornmeal and mending the coat and figuring out 60 days at a time, alone. And he went back to the house with 16 rooms and the lawyers and the crystal glasses. And if he told her the truth, who he was, what his name was on her loan, why he had come, she would look at him across the table with those gray eyes, and she would see every single thing he had not shown her yet. And she would have every reason in the world to tell him to take his money and leave. He turned onto his side in the dark. Bess shifted in her stall. The wind had died down after the blizzard broke, and the night was very still and very cold. The kind of cold that was almost peaceful if you were dry and covered. The kind of cold that simply killed you if you were not. He thought about Daniel saying, "That's just what happens," about a man who had done something for a long time and then stopped. He thought about Rose asking him why he didn't have children, with the direct honesty of someone who had not yet learned that some questions were supposed to be left unasked. He thought about Clara handing him 2 blankets and a lamp and saying, "I'm not asking what you need, I'm telling you what's available," and meaning it as completely as anything he had ever heard anyone say. He had ridden out of Cheyenne 11 days ago, looking for something true. He had found it. He just had not expected it to be this complicated, or this cold, or this much like standing at the edge of something he could not see the bottom of. He closed his eyes. In the kitchen across the dark yard, Clara sat at the table alone after the children were in bed. The lamp turned low, the tin box on the high shelf, the note from Cyrus Kane's office that she kept there, not the burned one, the copy she had made in her own handwriting the morning after, because she had learned, after Robert, that documents mattered, and copies mattered, and you did not let the only version of an important truth be the one held by someone who wished you harm. She looked at her handwriting. The date, the amount, the name on the lender's side, the legal entity her lawyer in town had told her was a holding company out of Cheyenne, a name that meant nothing to her, a corporation with no face. She folded it back into thirds, reached up and put it in the tin box, and closed the lid. Then she sat in the quiet kitchen and listened to the cold, and thought about a man who drew maps before he signed papers, and had hands that had not done hard work in a long time, and looked at her son with the expression of someone who had not been in a room with children in years, and was not sure what to do with how much he had missed it. She did not know yet what she was going to do about any of that. She knew she needed the wood split before February. She knew that was true. She blew out the lamp and went to bed. 2 weeks passed the way hard winter weeks did in Wyoming. Not quickly, not slowly, but with the specific weight of days that asked something from you every single morning before you had finished your first cup of coffee. Holt split the remaining wood in 4 days, finished the fence posts along the south line, patched the hole in the barn's north corner with cedar board he found stacked behind the water trough, and started on the chicken coop without being asked. Clara watched him work from various distances and said very little. She had a way of acknowledging completed work that was not quite gratitude and not quite instruction. She would look at what had been done, look at him, and then find the next thing that needed doing and make sure he could see it. He had started to understand this as her version of trust. Not given with words, given with the next task. The children had organized themselves around him according to their individual natures. Daniel followed him everywhere and offered opinions on everything, a running commentary that Holt had stopped trying to limit because Daniel simply resumed after any pause, with the persistence of water finding its way around a stone. Lucy maintained a careful, watchful distance that reminded Holt of her mother, except that Lucy's watchfulness had a sharper edge to it, the wariness of a girl who had been the oldest in a house that lost its anchor and had not yet decided if it was safe to stop compensating for that. She was polite. She was never warm. He respected her for both. Rose said almost nothing to him for the first 10 days. She watched. She appeared in doorways and at the edges of rooms, and once at the corner of the barn while he was working, standing there in her coat with her hands in her pockets, until he looked up and she walked away without any acknowledgement that she had been there at all. He did not press her. He had the sense that pressing Rose was exactly the wrong approach, that she made her decisions about people on her own schedule, and any interference would only set the clock back. On the 11th day, she came to the barn while he was oiling the harness tack and set a plate on the workbench beside him without a word. 2 pieces of cornbread and a spoonful of apple butter. Then she climbed up onto the stall rail across from him and sat there, watching him work. He kept working, didn't say anything. After about 5 minutes, she said, "Bess likes you." He glanced at the mare, who was standing with her nose toward him in the mild, interested way horses had when they were comfortable. "She's easy to get along with." "She wasn't easy when Papa was sick. She kicked Mr. Morrison when he came to check on the stock, and he said she was mean-natured." Rose watched the horse. "She's not mean. She just knew something was wrong and didn't know what to do with it." Holt set down the bridle, looked at Rose for a moment. "How old were you when your father passed?" 8. She said it the same way Daniel said hard things, straight out. No ceremony. Daniel was 5, so he doesn't remember as much. Lucy was 13, so she remembers everything. She tilted her head slightly. "I remember the in-between parts. Not the beginning and not the end. Just the middle, when everybody was still pretending things were going to be fine." Holt picked up the cornbread, ate a piece, and said nothing. Because there was nothing to say to that would not have been smaller than the thing she had just told him. "Mama doesn't pretend," Rose said. "That's different from most mothers, I think. She just says what is, even when what is bad." She looked at him with those gray eyes that took up more of her small face than eyes usually did. "She said you're good with the work, but you're hiding something." The harness strap went still in his hands. "She said that to you?" "She said it to Lucy. I heard." No apology for the eavesdropping, just fact. "She said you're hiding something, but it doesn't feel like the dangerous kind of hiding. It feels like the sad kind." Holt looked at the plate on the workbench. The apple butter had a particular smell, warm and sweet and faintly spiced, that he had been aware of every morning at breakfast without identifying until now. "Your mother make this?" he asked. "The apple butter." "Every September. She starts in the morning and it goes all day. The whole house smells like it." Rose slid off the stall rail. "She only makes enough to last through winter. She doesn't make extra, because there's no point making extra when you don't know what next September looks like." She picked up the empty plate, looked at him one more time. "I think she likes having you here. She won't say that, but I can tell." She walked out of the barn and left him sitting with the bridle in his lap and a feeling in his chest like something that had been locked for a long time had shifted on its hinges without quite opening. He sat there for a while. Then he looked down at the floor near the barn door, where Daniel's boot prints had dried in the mud from that morning. The left one, printing wrong. The outside edge clean, and the inside edge blurred, where the sole had separated and was folding under the foot. The boy had been wearing those boots for 6 weeks that Holt could account for. Almost certainly longer. He thought about the trading post in Copper Ridge. Patterson came through every Thursday. The following Thursday morning, Holt was at the fence line when Patterson's wagon came down the road, and he raised a hand, and the man pulled up, and Holt handed him a folded piece of paper and some coins from the bottom of his coat pocket. Not much. Exactly the amount a drifting laborer might have managed to save. Chosen carefully, so it would not look like anything except what it was supposed to look like. "Boys' boots," he said. "Size listed there. Give them to Mrs. Whitfield and say they're from the Trading Post's credit account. Tell her the owner said the Whitfield family had a standing credit he'd been meaning to clear." Patterson looked at him. "There ain't no standing credit." "There is now." He stepped back from the wagon. "Don't tell her it came from me." Patterson looked at the paper, at the coins, at Holt. Then he tucked it into his coat. "You know Mrs. Whitfield don't take charity." "It's not charity. It's a credit being settled. There's a difference." He turned back to the fence. Much obliged. He heard the wagon roll on. He drove the fence post into the frozen ground and did not let himself think about it too carefully. Because thinking about it too carefully meant thinking about everything else, and he was not ready to do that yet. Clara brought it up that evening. Not directly. She was not a direct person about things that carried weight, he had learned. She came at important things from an angle, the way you approached a nervous animal, giving it room to move before you closed the distance. "Patterson brought Daniel boots today," she said. She was washing the supper dishes, her back to him. "That's so." "Said there was a credit at the trading post I didn't know about." She scrubbed a bowl. "I've been trading at that post for 4 years, and there has never been a credit." Holt drank his coffee, said nothing. She turned around, looked at him with the direct gray assessment she used when she had already made up her mind about something and was just waiting to see if he would confirm it. "Jack." "I don't know anything about trading post credits." "You're a bad liar." "Most honest men are." Something moved through her eyes at that. Quick, complicated. She turned back to the dishes. "Daniel's been walking on the sole for 2 months. I kept telling myself, next week, next week." She was quiet for a moment. Her hands had stopped moving. "He put them on and ran to school this morning. Ran the whole way. Lucy said he was showing everyone before he even got through the door." Holt set the cup down, looked at the table. "I don't know what you're getting out of being here," Clara said. She started washing again. "I know you're not getting what you said you're getting, which is meals and a dry place to sleep in exchange for labor. Because no man with your hands and your manner does that calculation and ends up in someone's barn in January." She set a dish in the drying rack. "But whatever it is, it's not hurting my children, so I'm going to leave it alone for now." She looked at him over her shoulder. "For now." He held her gaze. "Fair enough." She turned back to the dishes. "Thank you," she said, quietly, like the words cost her something. "Don't mention it," he said, and meant both things. 3 days later, Cyrus Kane came. Holt was on the roof of the chicken coop, replacing 2 boards that had cracked under the snow weight when the horse came up the road. A good horse, well kept, moving with the particular confidence of an animal whose owner never questioned whether there would be feed at the end of the ride. The man in the saddle was perhaps 60, broad in the chest, wearing a coat that cost more than anything else on this property. He sat the horse the way men sat horses when they thought of the horse as furniture. Holt kept working, watched from the roofline. Kane did not tie the horse at the post. He rode it directly into the yard like the yard was already his, pulling up near the porch steps and waiting. He did not dismount. He did not call out. He just waited, with the patience of a man who is accustomed to people coming to him. Clara came out of the house after a minute. She had her coat on, which meant she had seen him from the window and taken the time to put it on, which meant she had taken the time to compose herself before opening the door. She stood at the top of the porch steps, did not come down them. "Mr. Kane." "Mrs. Whitfield." He touched the brim of his hat with 2 fingers, the minimum gesture. "Cold morning." "It is." "I was passing through from Aldridge's place." He was not passing through. The Aldridge ranch was in the opposite direction from Copper Ridge. "Thought I'd check in, see how you're getting on." "Getting on fine, thank you." Kane's eyes moved across the yard, took in the split wood stacked against the barn wall, the patched coop, the new fence posts along the south line. His gaze settled on Holt on the roofline for a moment, the same assessment Patterson had given him from the wagon. Drifter, worker, nothing notable, and moved on. "Looks like you've taken on some help," Kane said. "Seasonal labor." He settled back in the saddle. "I've been thinking about you, Mrs. Whitfield, about your situation. March is coming, and I'd hate to see this family put out in spring weather over a debt that could be resolved cleanly before then. The debt will be resolved. Will it? He said it without the rise at the end that would have made it a question. Just two words laid flat on the cold air. Because the numbers I'm looking at suggest that's going to be difficult. Even with a full season of travelers, which you won't have until April, you're short. Significantly short. I'm aware of my own finances, Mr. Kane. Of course you are. He shifted his weight in the saddle. I want to make you a fair offer, Clara. The land, the water rights, the station property. I'll pay you enough to clear the debt and have something left over. Enough to get the children to Denver, maybe. Make a fresh start, somewhere that isn't so hard. Clara was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was exactly level. This is my husband's land, my children's home. Robert's gone. The land is just land. The land is not just land. She said it without raising her voice, which somehow made it land harder than if she had shouted it. And I am not going to Denver. I am going to be right here in March, and right here in April, and right here next January, because this is where my family lives. If you want to discuss payment arrangements, you can send a letter through your office, like you usually do. She looked at him with those flat, clear eyes. Good morning, Mr. Kane. Kane held her gaze for 3 long seconds. Then something in his face shifted into the particular blankness of a man who had not gotten what he came for and was already calculating the next approach. Good morning, Mrs. Whitfield. He touched his hat again, turned the horse, rode out of the yard the same way he came in. Holt did not move on the roofline until the sound of hoofbeats had completely faded. Then he climbed down, slowly, and stood in the yard. Clara was still on the porch steps. Her arms were crossed over her chest, not the closed-off crossing, but the holding herself together kind, the way she crossed them when she was keeping something in rather than keeping something out. She was staring at the road. You all right? Holt said. Fine. Clara. She looked at him. He had used her name for the first time, and they both noticed it. A small change that meant something without either of them saying what. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were bright in the way eyes got when a person was refusing to let them be something else. He comes every 3 weeks, she said. Like clockwork. Every 3 weeks with a new version of the same offer. She looked back at the road. He thinks if he comes often enough, I'll get tired. That eventually tired will win over stubborn. She took a slow breath. He doesn't understand that tired and stubborn are the same thing in me. They come from the same place. Holt stood in the yard with a roofing hammer still in his hand and looked at her on the porch steps. The straight back, the locked jaw, the bright eyes that were absolutely not going to do what they wanted to do in front of him or anyone else, and felt something move through him that was not sympathy and not admiration exactly, but something that lived in the same territory as both of those, and was larger than either. He also felt the thing he had been carefully not feeling for 2 weeks, the thing that lay underneath every choice he had made since he rode through her gate in the blizzard. Kane had said the name of the lender's holding company twice during that conversation, casually, the way a man used a name he assumed the other person recognized. Clara had not reacted to it. She did not know the company name connected to him. But Kane knew. Kane knew exactly whose note he was holding, exactly whose instrument he was using to pressure this woman off her land. And he had ridden in here on a good horse, with a good coat, and called her Clara, and told her the land was just land, as if Robert Whitfield had not built it with his hands, and died for the income it was supposed to provide. Holt set the hammer on the porch rail. He know who holds the underlying note? He asked carefully. The company behind the loan? Clara looked at him. The question was specific enough that he saw her register its specificity, saw her file it the way she filed everything, without showing what drawer it went into. My lawyer says it's a holding company out of Cheyenne. Nobody local seems to know who's behind it. She paused. Why? Just trying to understand the shape of it. She looked at him for a moment longer than the answer warranted. You know, she said, something about the shape of it. It was not a question. It sat there between them in the cold air, and he did not answer it, and she did not push it. And after a moment, she uncrossed her arms and turned to go back inside. Supper in an hour, she said. Finish the roof. He picked up the hammer. He finished the roof. He came inside when she called. He sat at his end of the table, while Daniel showed everyone the new boots for the 4th day in a row. And Rose helped Lucy with the cornbread, and Clara set plates without looking at him more than once. The lamp burned low, and the stove ticked against the cold, and outside the February dark came down early and hard, the way it always did in Wyoming. After supper, Clara sent the children to bed and sat down across from him with her coffee cup and the tin box from the shelf, the one she kept the copy of the loan notice in. She set it on the table between them and put her hand on top of it and looked at him. I want to ask you something, she said, and I want you to think before you answer. Holt set his cup down, waited. The company name on my loan, she said. Callaway Territory Holdings. She watched his face with that precise, unhurried attention of hers. Have you heard of it? The kitchen was very quiet. The stove ticked. Somewhere down the hallway, a floorboard creaked, and then was still. Holt looked at Clara's hand on the tin box, at her face, at the way she was watching him without anger, without accusation, just with the absolute steady patience of a woman who had already decided she could handle whatever came next and was simply waiting to find out what it was. He thought about what Rose had said in the barn, the sad kind of hiding. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the tin box, then back at her. Clara, he said quietly, there are some things I need to tell you. She did not move, did not blink. Her hand stayed flat on the box. I know, she said. Just that. 2 words, with the weight of everything that had been building since the night he knocked on her door in the blizzard and put his palms out to show her he was not a danger. He had been wrong about that. He understood it now, sitting across from her in the lamplight with the children asleep down the hall and the cold pressing in from every wall. He was exactly the kind of danger he had promised he was not. The question was what he was going to do about it. He told her everything. Not all at once. It did not come out all at once, because it had been packed down for too long and came up in pieces, the way things did when they had been held under pressure. He told her about Cheyenne, about the lawyers and the portfolio of territory notes he had signed without reading each individual instrument, about the name on her loan document being his name, the company being his company, the debt she had been chipping away at for 3 years flowing directly into accounts that bore his signature at the bottom. He told her about the 2 women before. Not in detail, not asking for sympathy, just enough so she understood the shape of why he had come out here, in an old coat, on an old horse, in January, with only a first name. He told her he had ridden out looking for something true, and had not had a plan beyond that, which was the most honest thing he had said to anyone in longer than he could account for. He told her about Daniel's boots, about Patterson, about knowing from the first week that the soul was separating and not being able to say anything directly, because saying anything directly meant explaining how he noticed, which meant explaining who he was. He stopped talking. Clara had not moved for the last 10 minutes of it. Her hand was still flat on the tin box. Her coffee had gone cold. The lamp between them burned with the low, steady light of a wick that needed trimming, casting the kind of half-shadows that made a room feel smaller than it was, which at that moment Holt felt as its own particular punishment. She did not speak immediately. He had expected anger, had been braced for it since the night in the barn when he first understood he needed to tell her. Anger he could have handled. Anger had a shape and a direction. What Clara did instead was harder. She sat perfectly still and looked at the tin box under her hand, and said nothing at all for so long that the stove ticked 4 times and a log shifted in the firebox with a soft collapse of coals before she took a breath. "The boots," she said finally. Of everything he had told her, he had not expected that to be the first thing. "Clara, the boots." She looked up at him. Her eyes were not bright anymore. They were something else, something very controlled, the look of a woman who had locked a door from the inside and was deciding whether to open it or brace against it. "You knew for 2 weeks that my son was walking on a torn sole, and you couldn't just tell me because telling me meant telling me everything else?" "Yes." "So you sent them through Patterson?" "Yes." "So Daniel could have boots." She said it without inflection, just building the shape of it out loud, the way she calculated things, piece by piece until the full number appeared. "While you were sitting at my table every night, knowing your name was on the paper that's going to take his home." There was no version of yes to that, which was not what it was. "Yes," he said. Clara stood up. She walked to the window that faced the yard and stood there with her back to him, and he watched the set of her shoulders do something complicated, a tightening and then a release that was not relaxation, but the deliberate physical act of a woman choosing not to let something show. "How much is the note?" she asked. "Clara, that's not how much." He told her. She was quiet. Then, "That's 3 years of good seasons. Not years like this one. Good years." "I know." "And Kane knows it's yours." "Kane knows it belongs to the holding company. He may not know it comes directly to me. My lawyers handle the instrument. I don't interact with local managers." He paused. "But Kane is smart enough to have done the research. If he's pushing this hard, he probably knows." "Which means he knew when he rode into my yard and called this land just land." She turned around. Her face had settled into something he had not seen before. Not anger and not grief, but a cold, precise fury that was entirely different from both, because it was quiet. It was the kind of anger that did not raise its voice, because it did not need to. He knew whose note he was using. He knew, and he came here and made me that offer, and he was using your paper to do it. "Yes." "And you've been here 6 weeks." "Yes." "Sleeping in my barn, eating at my table." Each sentence landed separately, measured. "Letting my daughter tell you things. Letting my son teach you how to split wood." Her voice did not crack. He almost wished it had. A cracked voice he knew how to respond to. This was something else. "Letting Rose bring you cornbread." Holt did not look away from her. He owed her that much, to not look away while she built the full picture of it in front of him. "Yes." "And when were you going to tell me?" "Tonight." "Tonight because I asked directly." He did not answer that, because the honest answer was yes, and the honest answer was also more complicated than yes. And the more complicated version would have sounded like excuse-making, which was the one thing he was not going to do in this kitchen. Clara crossed her arms. Not the holding together kind this time, the other kind. "I want you to leave," she said. "Tonight." "Clara, don't." The word was a wall, flat and complete. Don't say my name like you know me. Don't tell me you were going to tell me. Don't tell me you're sorry. Her jaw tightened. I have been apologized to by men who were in the wrong before. Robert used to say sorry and mean it so hard it came out of him like something physical. You don't get to borrow that word right now. He stood up slowly from the table. He had known this was how it would go, had known it from the barn the first night, had known it every morning when he got up before dawn and split wood, and told himself he was just buying time to figure out the right way, which was the lie men told themselves when they were not ready to pay the price of the right thing. I'll retire the note, he said. First thing in the morning, I can ride to Copper Ridge and send a wire to my lawyers. The debt will be clear before the end of the week. The land stays yours. No conditions. I don't want your money. It's not, it is. She looked at him steadily. It's exactly your money. It's your money that created the problem, and your money solving it. And it doesn't matter what you call it. I will not have my children's home standing on your charity. It's not charity. It's a wrong being corrected. By the man who did the wrong. That's still charity. It just has a different name. She unfolded her arms, set her hands flat on the table, leaned forward slightly with the posture of a woman who had something precise to say, and was going to say it clearly. I am not a project, Jack. I am not a charitable cause. I am not something that needs to be fixed by the right rich man deciding to pay attention. Her voice was very steady. I have been holding this family together for 3 years without anyone's help, and I was going to hold it together for 60 more days and figure something out. That was my problem to solve. Mine. Cain was going to take it from you. Maybe, and I was going to fight that too. My way. She straightened up. Now I'll never know if I could have, because you're here and the note's yours, and whatever happens next has your fingerprints on it. She looked at him for a long moment. My husband built this place with his hands. He wasn't rich, and he wasn't important, and he died in a hole in the ground for wages that barely covered what we owed on the equipment. But every board in this house and every post in that fence is his. It's real. It means something because of what it cost. She picked up the tin box from the table. What does something cost you, Mr. Calloway? What have you ever built that you couldn't just pay someone else to build? The question sat in the room, and Holt had no answer for it, because the answer was nothing, and they both knew it. He picked up his coat from the hook by the door, his hat. He stood for a moment with his back to her, and then turned around because he owed her that much too. I'm not going to retire the note without your agreement, he said. That's your choice to make, not mine. I understand that. He held her gaze. But I'm going to ride to Copper Ridge first thing tomorrow, regardless. And I'm going to deal with Cain personally. Whatever he thinks he knows about the instrument, whatever leverage he thinks he has over you through my paper, that ends tomorrow. That I can do without your permission, because that's between him and me. Clara looked at him. That's not charity, he said. That's just me cleaning up my own mess, which I should have done 6 weeks ago, before I knocked on your door. He went out the back. The cold hit him full in the face, sharp and clean after the close warmth of the kitchen. He crossed the yard to the barn, saddled Buttercup in the dark by feel, the same motions he had made the first night he arrived, and rode out before the lamp in the kitchen window had a chance to go dark. He did not look back. The road to Copper Ridge was 12 miles in the dark and cold, and Holt rode it with the specific, focused misery of a man who had earned exactly what he was feeling, and knew it. The moon was half full, and the snow reflected enough light to see by, the road running white between dark fields, the mountains in the distance blocking out the stars at the horizon. He reached Copper Ridge at just past midnight. The town was dark, except for the light in the window of the Silver Flag Saloon, which, in every western town of this size, ran later than everything else. He tied Buttercup at the rail, went inside, asked the barman where Cyrus Kane lived, and was told without hesitation, because in a town this size, everyone knew where the banker lived, and nobody needed to ask why someone might want to find him at midnight. Kane's house was at the north end of the main street, the largest private residence in Copper Ridge. 2 stories, painted white, with the particular self-satisfaction of a house built to be seen. Holt knocked on the front door with 3 hard knocks and waited. It took 4 minutes. Kane opened the door in his robe, lamp in hand, his broad face arranged in the expression of a man who had been woken up and had not yet decided how angry to be about it. He looked at Holt, took in the coat, the hat, the cold, reddened face of someone who had ridden 12 miles in January darkness. Started to say something dismissive. Then something shifted in his eyes. A recognition, or the beginning of one. Not of Holt's face, which he had never seen, but of something else. Something in the posture, maybe. The way Holt stood. The way he was looking at Kane without the smallest trace of uncertainty. "Mr. Kane," Holt said, "my name is Thomas Holt Calloway. I believe you've been working with my paper." The lamp in Kane's hand wavered. His face did the thing faces did when a calculation ran fast and came out somewhere unexpected. "Mr. Calloway," he said it carefully, testing the weight of it. "This is irregular, yes." Holt did not move from the doorstep, did not ask to come in. "I want to be clear about something. The Whitfield note is being withdrawn from collection. Tonight. I'll send the formal wire to my lawyers at first light, but I want you to hear it from me directly. Whatever arrangement you had in mind regarding that property and those water rights is finished." Kane's jaw tightened. "With respect, that instrument is mine, which means the decision is mine." Holt let that sit for a moment. "You've been visiting that woman every 3 weeks, riding onto her property without invitation, sending surveyors without notice." He kept his voice level, not threatening, just precise, the way his lawyer was precise, the way a man was precise when he had decided exactly what he meant to say and had no interest in moving from it. "That stops tonight, too. I have legitimate business interests in that." "You have interests. Whether they're legitimate depends on how you've been pursuing them. And from what I've seen, the answer to that is no." Kane started to speak again, and Holt held up one hand, a simple, quiet gesture that had the effect it had because it was not aggressive. It was certain. "I'm not here to threaten you, Mr. Kane. I'm here to tell you the situation has changed, and to make sure you heard it directly. Professional courtesy." He lowered his hand. "I'll expect confirmation from my lawyers within the week that the instrument has been properly closed and all collection activities ceased. If that doesn't happen, I'll be having a longer conversation with the Territorial Banking Authority about some of the other methods I observed during my time in this area." Kane stared at him. The lamplight caught the calculation running behind his eyes, the rapid reassessment of a man who had been operating on one set of assumptions and had just had them removed. "You've been in the area," he said slowly. "How long?" "Long enough." Holt stepped back from the doorstep. "Good night, Mr. Kane." He rode back through the dark and the cold and reached the Whitfield station as the sky was beginning its first gray suggestion of dawn along the eastern horizon. He unsaddled Buttercup in the barn, rubbed her down, put fresh hay in the stall. He did it all slowly, by feel, the way he had done it the first night, and when he was finished, he sat down on the floor with his back against the stall door, and his knees up, and his head back, and closed his eyes. He had not decided what came next. He had no plan past this morning. The note would be retired. Kane would not come back. The land was safe, and Clara's choice was clear, and what she did with that was entirely hers. He heard the barn door open, heard the footsteps, not Clara's, too light, too quick, and opened his eyes. Rose stood inside the door in her coat and her boots, her dark hair loose around her face, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. She looked at him on the floor of the barn with the particular unsurprise of a child who had been awake and aware of more than the adults knew. "You came back," she said. "For now." She walked to the stall rail, climbed up, sat the same way she had sat when she brought him the cornbread. Looked at Buttercup, then at him. "Mama was in the kitchen all night. I could hear her not sleeping." Holt did not say anything. "She cried," Rose said. "Just for a little while. She doesn't do that very often. She thinks we don't know when she does." She swung her feet against the rail. "We always know." He looked at this 11-year-old girl sitting in the cold barn in the gray beginning of morning and felt the full accumulated weight of everything he had done and not done over the past 6 weeks pressed down on him at once, which was what happened when you stopped moving and let yourself feel the thing you had been out pacing. "I handled things badly," he said. "Yes." No softening of it, just agreement. Then, "Are you going to leave?" "I don't know yet." Rose considered this. Mama said once that the difference between a man worth keeping and a man who isn't is whether he stays when staying is hard. She tilted her head. She was talking about Papa, but I think it applies generally. He looked at her. "Rose, I'm the man whose name is on the paper that was going to take your house." "I know. Mama told us this morning." She met his gaze directly. "Lucy wants you gone. Daniel cried and then said he didn't, which means he cried." She paused. "I think you made a mistake. But I also think you came back and you didn't have to." She slid off the rail and landed with both feet in the hay. "That counts for something, in my opinion." She walked to the barn door, stopped, turned back. "Breakfast is in an hour," she said. "Mama didn't say you were invited. She also didn't say you weren't." She looked at him one more time with those gray eyes that saw everything and hid very little. "I think if you were there, she wouldn't make you leave." She went out. The barn door swung closed behind her. Holt sat on the floor of the barn in the cold and the growing light and thought about a woman sitting up alone in a kitchen all night, and 3 children who had each handled the same information in their own particular way, and the fact that he had ridden 12 miles in the dark and 12 miles back and was sitting here at dawn with straw on his coat and nothing decided. He thought about what Clara had asked him. What have you ever built that you couldn't just pay someone else to build? He looked at his hands in the gray light. The calluses had come in over the past 6 weeks. Real ones, the kind earned. Not the story a lifetime of work wrote, but a beginning. The first sentence of one. He got up, brushed the straw from his coat, washed his face and hands at the water barrel inside the barn door. The water so cold, it made his knuckles ache. He put his hat on, looked at the barn door for a moment. Then he walked across the yard toward the house. The back door was unlocked. Holt stood on the porch for a moment with his hand on the latch, understanding what that meant. She had left it unlocked through the night, through the hours she had sat alone in the kitchen, through whatever she had worked through between dark and dawn. She had not bolted the door against him. He did not know if that was intention or habit, but he chose to understand it as the only thing he could do with it, which was that there was still something on the other side of this door worth walking toward. He went in. Clara was at the stove. She had her back to him, the familiar straight-back posture, the apron tied at the waist, the coffee pot in her hand. She did not turn around. The kitchen smelled of coffee and the faint sweetness of apple butter warming, and the stove ticked its steady tick against the cold. And for a moment, everything was so exactly like every other morning of the past 6 weeks that the wrongness of what sat between them felt even heavier by contrast. He took off his hat, stood inside the door. "Clara." She set the coffee pot down, still did not turn. "You rode to Copper Ridge?" "Yes." "Last night, in the dark?" "Yes." Now she turned. She looked at him the way she always looked at him, directly, without hurry, taking the full measure of what was in front of her. Her eyes were not red. She had told Rose she cried, and Holt believed it, but there was no evidence of it now. She had put herself back together with the same deliberate precision she put everything back together with. And what was left in her face was not warmth and not coldness, but something stripped down and honest that was harder to face than either. "You went to see Kane," she said. "Yes." "And?" "The note is being retired. I wired my lawyers at first light from the telegraph office. It'll be formally closed by Friday. Kane won't come back." He held her gaze. "That's done. Whatever you decide about everything else, that part is done regardless." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her eyes, complicated and quick. And then she turned back to the stove and poured 2 cups of coffee and set one at his end of the table without a word. He sat down. She sat across from him. The tin box was gone from the table. "Lucy wants you gone," she said. "I know. Rose told me." "Rose told you?" Clara looked at her cup. "Of course she did." She was quiet for a moment. "Daniel built a fence out of sticks this morning, in the yard. Said he was practicing for when he's old enough to do the real ones." She did not look up. "He didn't say anything about you. He just built the fence." Holt wrapped his hands around the cup. "Clara, I'm not going to ask you to let me stay. I don't have the right to ask you anything. But I want to say something, and then I'll leave if you want me to, and I'll stay gone." She looked up. "I have spent 30 years, he said, being the most important person in every room I walked into. Not because I earned it every day, because I earned it once, or inherited part of it, and then it just kept being true without me having to do anything to deserve it." He looked at his hands on the cup. "I rode out here because I was empty, in a way that the money couldn't touch. I told myself I was looking for something true, and that was real. But what I actually did when I got here was use your house and your table and your children's trust to make myself feel like a better man than I'd been. And I let it go on too long because I didn't want to lose it." He looked up. "That's the truth of it, not the charitable version, the actual one." Clara did not speak. "You asked me what I've ever built that I couldn't pay someone else to build," he said. "The answer is nothing. Before these past 6 weeks, nothing." He turned the cup slowly between his palms. "But I know what it feels like now, to do the work, to have my back hurt in the morning because I did something real with my body the day before, to sit at a table where people say what they mean." He stopped. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that what happened here was real for me. Every morning, every meal, every conversation on that porch." He set the cup down. "It was the most real 6 weeks of my life. And I know that's a damning thing to admit about 60 years of living, but it's true." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a crow called once from somewhere near the barn, and then was silent. Clara looked at him for a long time. The straight set of her jaw, the steady gray eyes, the hands wrapped around her cup, the calluses and the cracked knuckles, and the short nails of a woman who had not had the luxury of looking at her own hands as anything except tools for a very long time. "My husband used to say," she said slowly, "that a man's worth wasn't in what he had, it was in what he did when he didn't have to." She paused. "You didn't have to go to Kane. You could have sent a letter from Cheyenne. You could have had your lawyers handle it from a distance, with no one ever knowing your name was on anything." She looked at him. "You rode 12 miles in the dark, in January, to stand on that man's porch and say it to his face." He deserved to hear it from a person, not a letter. "Yes." She was quiet again. Then, "Why didn't you tell me who you were? From the start, when you first came?" He had turned this question over enough times in the past weeks that the answer was smooth and worn. "Because the moment you knew, you would have seen the money first. And I needed to know. I needed to find out if there was a version of me worth knowing that didn't have the money in front of it." He held her gaze. "I wasn't testing you. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't dressing up like a beggar to see who would be kind to me. I was trying to find out if I was still a person when the money was gone." He paused. "That's a different thing. But it doesn't make the lie less of a lie." Clara was quiet for so long that he heard the children begin to move in the back of the house. Rose's light step, Daniel's heavier one, the particular creak of Lucy's door that he had learned to identify over 6 weeks of mornings. The house waking up around them, ordinary and irreplaceable. "Last October," Clara said at last, "I was short on the flour. About 3 weeks short. I had enough for one more bag, and then I was going to have to ask Nettie Groves next door to loan me some, or do without until Patterson's Thursday run." She looked at her cup. "I sat at this table at 2 in the morning, and I thought about asking for help, and I couldn't do it. Couldn't make myself. Because asking for help meant admitting out loud that I wasn't managing. And if I admitted that out loud, I was afraid it would become more true than it already was." She looked up at him. "I understand about needing to find out if you're still a person when something is gone. I understand that better than you might think." Something loosened in Holt's chest. Not resolved. Nothing was resolved. But loosened. "I'm still angry," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not finished being angry about the way it was handled, and I won't be finished for a while." "I know. And Lucy is going to be harder than me. She doesn't give second chances easily." "I know that too. And you should know that I don't need you to fix anything." She set her cup down flat on the table. "The land being clear is right, because it was your wrong to correct. But I was going to figure out the 60 days. I don't know exactly how, but I was going to." Her jaw set with that particular finality. "I need you to believe that." "I believe it," he said. And he meant it completely, which was the thing that 6 weeks in this house had given him that nothing else in his life had. The ability to look at a woman who had been holding an impossible situation together with nothing but will and competence and practicality, and to believe without any qualification that she would have found the way. "Then here is what I'm going to say." She folded her hands on the table, the gesture of a woman organizing her thoughts into something she was going to mean precisely. "You can stay through the end of February. There is still work that needs doing, and you know how to do it now, which took long enough to establish that it would be wasteful to send you off before the work is done." She met his eyes. "That's practical. Not forgiveness, not permission to be something you haven't earned yet. Just practical." "Understood. After February, we talk again." She stood, picked up her cup, moved to the stove. "Breakfast in 20 minutes. Go wash up properly. You've got hay in your collar." Holt looked down. There was hay in his collar. He reached up and removed it, set it on the table. Looked at it for a moment. This small piece of dried grass from his bed on the floor of the barn, 6 weeks of mornings compressed into one small thing. "Clara," he said. She looked at him over her shoulder. "Thank you," he said, "for the unlocked door." She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her face did the complicated thing it did when she was feeling something she had not decided to name yet. Then she turned back to the stove. 20 minutes, she said. Lucy came to the kitchen first, as she always did, and stopped when she saw him at the table. Her jaw went exactly the way Clara's jaw went when she was holding something in, which was how he knew, beyond any doubt, that she was her mother's daughter. She was 16 years old, and she looked at him with the clear, unsparing eyes of someone who had been the oldest child in a house that lost its foundation, and had spent 3 years compensating for it, and she did not say a word. He did not look away. "Lucy," he said, "I owe you an apology, and I'd like to give it properly, if you're willing to hear it." She crossed her arms, said nothing, but she did not leave. "I lied to your family," he said. "Not about everything, but about the things that matter most. I sat at your table, and I ate your food, and I watched your mother work herself down to the bone, solving a problem that had my name attached to it. And I waited too long to say so." He held her gaze. "I don't have a good reason for that. I have an explanation, but it's not the same as a reason. I'm sorry." Lucy looked at him for a long moment. "Mama said you went to Kane last night." "Yes." "She said you rode there in the dark." "Yes." "Why didn't you just send a wire from here?" "Because he needed to hear it from a person." Lucy uncrossed her arms slowly. The movement was small, but it was something. She walked to the stove and stood next to her mother without saying anything else, and Clara handed her the spoon without being asked. And they stood there together, turning the mush and not speaking. And Holt watched them, and understood that he was seeing the actual architecture of this family. Not the words, but the language underneath the words, the one they had built in the 3 years since Robert died, and that whatever place he might eventually earn in it would have to be built on that foundation, and not on top of it. Daniel came in at a run, as he always did, and pulled up short when he saw Holt, and the run stop happened so fast that he slid 2 inches on the kitchen floor in his new boots. He stood there looking at Holt with his father's dark eyes, and Holt looked back, and a long second passed between them. Then Daniel said, "The south fence post near the gate is leaning again. The ground froze and heaved it." "I'll fix it after breakfast," Holt said. Daniel nodded once, climbed into his chair, and reached for the cornbread like nothing had happened, which, in the language of 8-year-old boys, meant everything. Rose came last, and sat across from Holt, and looked at him with those clear gray eyes, and gave him one small nod, the nod of someone whose assessment had been confirmed, and went about her breakfast with the quiet self-possession of a child who had always known what she thought, and was comfortable being right. The meal was not easy. Lucy was careful and watchful, her words measured, nothing offered freely. Clara said practical things about practical matters: the south pasture fence, the state of the root cellar, whether the second cow was going to calve early. But the table was set for 5, and the lamp was lit, and the apple butter was on the board, and outside the Wyoming winter pressed on the walls with its hard, indifferent cold, and inside, the stove burned, and the coffee was real, and the people around the table were real. And this, Holt understood, was the thing he had ridden out of Cheyenne to find. Not comfort, not ease. This, the specific, irreplaceable realness of a life that meant something because of what it had cost the people living it. After breakfast, he fixed the fence post. He took Daniel with him, because Daniel appeared at his elbow before he had gotten his coat on, and they worked side by side in the cold, the boy handing up the tools with the practiced efficiency he had developed over the past 6 weeks, the one that made him look, briefly, like the man he was going to be. "Jack," Daniel said, while Holt tamped the post back into the frozen ground. "Yeah." "Is your real name Jack?" Holt looked at the boy. There was no accusation in the question, just the pure, practical curiosity of a child who wanted accurate information. "No," he said. "It's Holt. Thomas Holt Calloway." Holt. Daniel tried it out. "Holt." Then, "Why'd you say Jack?" "Because I was trying to be somebody simpler for a while." Daniel thought about this with the serious concentration he brought to things that interested him. Did it work? Holt drove the post into the ground one more time and looked at the Whitfield station. The house, with its sagging porch. The barn with its patched north corner. The chicken coop with its new boards. The garden beds under the snow where Clara would put seeds in April. The fence line running south toward the road where Cyrus Kane would not be coming anymore. "No," he said. "Turns out you can't get simpler by pretending. You get simpler by doing the work." Daniel nodded, like this confirmed something he had already suspected. "Papa used to say the same thing, different." He picked up the extra tamping rod and handed it over. He said, "You don't find out who you are by thinking about it. You find out by what you do when things get hard." Smart man. "Yeah." Daniel looked at the post, then at Holt. "I think you should stay," he said. Direct and simple, the way he said everything. Not because of the land stuff or the money stuff, just because Mama laughs more when there's someone to talk to at supper. She thinks we don't notice. He picked up the tool bag. We notice. Holt stood there in the cold with the wind coming off the North Hills, and the sky the pale, hard blue of a Wyoming February afternoon, and felt the specific weight of what this boy had just handed him. Which was not permission. That was not Daniel's to give, but something rarer, which was the truth of what mattered in this house, offered freely by someone too young to know the value of it. "I'll keep that in mind," Holt said. In the days that followed, he stayed. He fixed the south fence completely, not just the leaning post, but the 3 sections that had weakened over the winter, resetting every post, replacing the wire that had stretched and gone slack. He split the last of the seasoned oak and started on the green pine, stacking it to dry under the barn overhang, where it would be ready by next November. He helped Clara reinforce the root cellar door that had warped on its hinges and let the cold in. And when he was done, she stood in the cellar doorway and tested the swing twice and said nothing. But the way she said nothing was different from how she had said nothing in the first days after he told her the truth. On the last day of February, the wire came back from his lawyers confirming the note had been formally retired and the lien discharged. Clara read the document at the kitchen table twice, folded it, and put it in the tin box on the high shelf next to her own handwritten copy of the old notice. She stood with her hand on the shelf for a moment, and Holt watched her from the doorway without coming in, because some moments were not his to enter. That evening, after the children were in bed, she came out to the barn. He heard her footsteps on the frozen ground and looked up from the harness tack he had been oiling, and she came in and stood near the stall rail the way Rose stood, not close and not far. She said, "I want to ask you something." "All right." "What do you want?" She looked at him directly, not the question a person asked when they wanted a specific answer. The question a person asked when they needed to know the true shape of someone before they decided anything. Not what you think you should want. Not what makes a good reason for staying. What do you actually want? Holt set the bridle down. He looked at his hands, the calluses that had come in over these weeks, real and earned. The beginning of a story that a man's hands were supposed to tell. He looked at Clara, at the straight back and the steady eyes and the jaw that held its line through everything, and the hands that had made something out of nothing for 3 years, without anyone watching or thanking her for it. "This," he said, "this specific thing, not something like it, not something better, this kitchen and this land and these 3 children and you." He held her gaze. "I know I have to earn it. I know Lucy is still deciding, and that might take a long time. I know I am starting from behind because of what I did, and I am not asking to skip any of that." He paused. "But that is what I want. And I thought you deserved an honest answer when you asked an honest question." Clara looked at him for a long time. The barn was very quiet. Buttercup shifted softly in her stall. The cold pressed in through the boards, and the single lamp made its small circle of warmth against all that dark. "March is tomorrow," she said finally. "I know." "The land is clear. You don't owe me anything past that." "I know." "So if you stay past tomorrow," she said, "you're staying because you chose to, not because there's something to fix or correct or make up for. Just because you chose it." She tilted her head slightly. "Can you do that? Stay for a reason that's just itself, with no other justification?" He thought about the crystal glasses in the Cheyenne house that no one ever used, the table built for 20 people who never came, the 60 years of accumulating things that cost nothing because everything was purchasable, and therefore nothing meant anything. He thought about a boy teaching him to split pine off-center, a girl bringing cornbread to a barn, a woman leaving a door unlocked at midnight. "Yes," he said, "I can do that." Clara held his gaze one final moment. Then she reached out and took the bridle from the workbench and hung it on its hook on the wall, the way she straightened and ordered everything in her domain. The small automatic gesture of a woman who had never once waited for someone else to put things where they belonged. "Breakfast is at 6, she said. "Don't be late." She walked out. The barn door closed behind her. Through the slats, Holt could see the kitchen window light up as she went inside, that warm square of yellow in the dark. And he sat there in the cold barn, with his hands on his knees, and felt something settle in his chest that was so different from anything money had ever bought him that he had no existing word for it. He thought of the old word, the plain one, the one that did not need explaining because it was old enough to mean exactly one thing and had never meant anything else. Home. That was what this was. He had ridden out of Cheyenne with nothing but an old coat and an old horse, and a name his father used to call him, looking for something true. He had found it in the most honest possible way, not by being given it, not by buying it, not by deserving it before he arrived, but by working for it in the cold and telling the truth when the truth cost him everything, and then showing up the next morning anyway and doing the work again. Some things in this world could not be purchased. They had to be built, board by board, day by day, in the specific weather of a specific life, with the specific people who were standing in front of you. And when you built them right, when you built them out of true lumber and honest labor, and the willingness to stay when staying was the hardest thing, they lasted. Thomas Holt Calloway blew out the lamp, walked across the dark yard, and went inside to where the light was.